Chapter 7, Adventure at the Seaside. One morning, Mr. Brown tapped the barometer in the hall. "Looks like it's going to be a nice day," he said. "How about a trip to the sea?" His remark was greeted with enthusiasm by the rest of the family, and in no time at all, the house was in an uproar. Mrs. Bird started to cut a huge pile of sandwiches, while Mr. Brown got the car ready. Jonathan and Judy searched for their bathing suits, and Paddington went to his room to pack. An outing which involved Paddington was always rather a business, as he insisted on taking all his things with him. As time went by, he had acquired lots of things. As well as his suitcase, he now had a smart weekend grip with the initials PB inscribed on the side, and a paper carrier bag for the odds and ends. For the summer months, Mrs. Brown had bought him a sun hat. It was made of straw and very floppy. Paddington liked it, for by turning the brim up or down he could make it different shapes, and it was really like having several hats in one. "When we get to Brightsea," said Mrs. Brown, "we'll buy you a bucket and spade. Then you can make a sandcastle." "And you can go on the pier," said Jonathan eagerly. "They've got some super machines there on the pier. You'd better bring plenty of pennies." "And we can go swimming," said Judy. "You can swim, can't you?" Not very well, I'm afraid," replied Paddington. "You see, I've never been to the seaside before." "Never been to the seaside?" Everyone stopped what they were doing and stared at Paddington. "Never," said Paddington. They all agreed that it must be nice to be going to the seaside for the first time in one's life. Even Mrs. Bird began talking about the time she first went to Brightsea many years before. Paddington became very excited as they told him all the wonderful things he was going to see. The car was crowded when they started off. Mrs. Bird, Judy and Jonathan sat in the back. Mr. Brown drove and Mrs. Brown and Paddington sat beside him. Paddington liked sitting in the front, especially when the window was open, so he could poke his head out into the cool breeze. After a minor delay, when Paddington's hat flew off in the outskirts of London, they soon came to the open road. "Can you smell the sea yet, Paddington?" asked Mrs. Brown after a while. Paddington poked his head out and sniffed. "I can smell something," he said. "Well," said Mr. Brown, "keep on sniffing because we're almost there." And sure enough, as they reached the top of a hill and rounded a corner to go down the other side, there it was in the distance, glistening in the morning sun. Paddington's eyes opened wide. "Look at all the boats on the dirt," he cried, pointing in the direction of the beach with his paw. Everyone laughed. "That's not dirt," said Judy. "That's sand." By the time they had explained all about sand to Paddington, they were in Brightsea itself and driving along the front. Paddington looked at the sea rather doubtfully. The waves were much bigger than he'd imagined. Not so big as the ones he'd seen on his journey to England, but quite large enough for a small bear. Mr. Brown stopped the car by a shop on the esplanade and took out some money. "I'd like to fit this bear out for a day at the seaside," he said to the lady behind the counter. "Let's see now. We shall need a bucket and spade, a pair of sunglasses, one of those rubber tyres." As he reeled off the list, the lady handed the articles to Paddington, who began to wish he had more than two paws. He had a rubber tyre round his middle which kept slipping down round his knees, a pair of sunglasses balanced precariously on his nose, his straw hat, a bucket and spade in one hand and his suitcase in the other. "Photograph, sir?" Paddington turned to see an untidy man with a camera looking at him. "Only a shilling, sir. Results guaranteed. Money back if you're not satisfied." Paddington considered the matter for a moment. He didn't like the look of the man very much, but he'd been saving hard for several weeks and now had just over 3 shillings. It'd be nice to have a picture of himself. "Won't take a minute, sir," said the man, disappearing behind a black cloth on the back of the camera. "Just watch the birdie." Paddington looked round. There was no bird in sight as far as he could see. He went round behind the man and tapped him. The photographer, who appeared to be looking for something, jumped and then emerged from under his cloth. "How do you expect me to take your picture if you don't stand in front?" he asked in an aggrieved voice. "Now I wasted a plate." And he looked shiftily at Paddington. "That will cost you a shilling." Paddington gave him a hard stare. "You said there was a bird," he said, "and there wasn't." "I expect it flew away when it saw your face," said the man nastily. "Now where's my shilling?" Paddington looked at him even harder for a moment. "Perhaps the bird took it when it flew off," he said, "Ha, ha, ha," cried another photographer who had been watching the proceedings with interest. "Fancy you being taken in by a bear, Charlie. Serves you right for trying to take photographs without a licence. Now be off with you before I call a policeman." He watched while the other man gathered up his belongings and slouched off in the direction of the pier. Then he turned to Paddington. "These people are a nuisance," he said, "taking away the living from honest folks. You did quite right not to pay him any money, and if you'll allow me, I'll take you a nice picture myself as a reward." The Brown family exchanged glances. "I don't know," said Mr. Brown. "Paddington always seems to fall on his feet." "That's because he's a bear," said Mrs. Bird darkly. "Bears always fall on their feet." She led the way onto the beach and carefully laid out the travel rug on the sand behind the breakwater. "This'll be as good a spot as any," she said. "Then we shall all know where to come back to and no one will get lost." "The tide's out," said Mr. Brown, "so it'll be nice and safe for bathing." He turned to Paddington. "Are you going in, Paddington?" he asked. Paddington looked at the sea. "I might go for a paddle," he said. "Well, hurry up," said Judy, "and bring your bucket and spade, then we can practice making sandcastles." "Gosh," Jonathan pointed to a notice pinned on the wall behind them. "Look, there's a sandcastle competition. Whizzo! First prize, £2 for the biggest sandcastle." "Suppose we all join in and make one," said Judy. "I bet the three of us together could make the biggest one you'd ever seen." "I don't think you're allowed to," said Mrs. Brown, reading the notice. "It says here everyone has to make their own." Judy looked disappointed. "Well, I shall have a go anyway. Come on, you two. Let's have a bathe first, and then we'll start digging after lunch." She raced down the sand, closely followed by Jonathan and Paddington. At least Jonathan followed, but Paddington only got a few yards before his lifebelt slipped down and he went headlong into the sand. "Paddington, do give me your suitcase," called Mrs. Brown. "You can't take it into the sea with you. It'll get wet and ruined." Looking rather chestfallen, Paddington handed his things to Mrs. Brown for safekeeping and then ran down the beach after the others. Judy and Jonathan were already a long way out when he got there, so he contented himself with sitting on the water's edge for a while, letting the waves swirl round him as they came in. It was a nice feeling, a bit cold at first, but he soon got warm. He decided the seaside was a nice place to be. He paddled out to where the water was deeper and then lay back in his rubber tyre, letting the waves carry him gently back to the shore. £2. Supposing he won 2 whole pounds. He closed his eyes. In his mind he had a picture of a beautiful castle made of sand, like the one he'd once seen in a picture book, with battlements, towers and a moat. It was getting bigger and bigger, and everyone on the beach had stopped to gather round and cheer. Several people said they'd never seen such a big sandcastle, and he woke with a start as he felt someone splashing water on him. "Come on, Paddington," said Judy, lying here in the sun fast asleep. "It's time for lunch, and we've got lots of work to do afterwards." Paddington felt disappointed. It'd been a nice sandcastle in his dream. He was sure he would have won first prize. He rubbed his eyes and followed Judy and Jonathan up the beach to where Mrs. Bird had laid out the sandwiches, ham, egg, cheese for everyone else, and special marmalade ones made for Paddington, with ice cream and fruit salad to follow. "I vote," said Mr. Brown, who had in mind an afternoon nap for himself, "that after we've eaten, you'll go off in different directions and make your own sandcastles. Then we'll have our own private competition as well as the official one. I'll give you 2 shillings for the one with the biggest sandcastle." All three thought that this was a good idea. "But don't go too far away," said Mrs. Brown, as Jonathan, Judy and Paddington set off. "Remember the tide's coming in?" Her advice fell on deaf ears. They were all much too interested in sandcastles. Paddington, especially, was gripping his bucket and spade in a very determined fashion. The beach was crowded, and he had to walk quite a long way before he found a deserted spot. First of all, he dug a big moat in a circle, leaving himself a drawbridge so he could fetch and carry the sand for the castle itself. Then he set to work, carrying bucket loads of sand to build the walls of the castle. He was an industrious bear, and even though it was hard work and his legs and paws soon got tired, he persevered until he had a huge pile of sand in the middle of his circle. Then he set to work with his spade, smoothing out the walls and making the battlements. They were very good battlements, with holes for windows and slots for the archers to fire through. When he had finished, he stuck his spade in one of the corner towers, placed his hat on top of that, and then lay down inside next to his marmalade jar and closed his eyes. He felt tired, but very pleased with himself. With the gentle roar of the sea in his ears, he soon went fast asleep. "We've been all along the beach," said Jonathan, "and we can't see him anywhere." "He didn't even have his lifebelt with him," said Mrs. Brown anxiously. "Nothing, just a bucket and spade." The Browns were gathered in a worried group around the man from the life-saving hut. "He's been gone several hours," said Mr. Brown, "and the tide has been in over 2. The man looked serious. "And you say he can't swim?" he asked. "He doesn't even like having a bath much," said Judy, "so I'm sure he can't swim." "Here's his photograph," said Mrs. Bird. "He only had it taken this morning." She handed the man Paddington's picture, then dabbed her eyes with her handkerchief. "I know something's happened to him. He wouldn't have missed tea unless something was wrong." The man looked at the picture. "We could send out a description," he said dubiously, "but it's a job to see what he looks like by that picture. It's all hat and dark glasses." "Can't you launch a lifeboat?" asked Jonathan hopefully. "We could," said the man, "if we knew where to look, but he might be anywhere." "Oh dear," Mrs. Brown reached for her handkerchief as well. "I can't bear to think about it." "Something will turn up," said Mrs. Bird comfortingly. "He's got a good head on his shoulders." "Well," said the man, holding up a dripping straw hat, "you'd better have this. And in the meantime, we'll see what we can do." There, Mary," said Mr. Brown, and as he held his wife's arm. "Perhaps he just left it on the beach or something. May have got picked up by the tide." He bent down to pick up the rest of Paddington's belongings. They seemed very small and lonely, lying there on their own. "It's Paddington's hat all right," said Judy, examining it. "Look, it's got his mark inside." She turned the hat inside and showed them the outline of a paw mark in black ink and the words, "My hat, Paddington." "I vote we all separate," said Jonathan, "and comb the beach. We'll stand more chance that way."